Good morning. We've been talking about Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore and his ideas as a preparation for Membership Sunday at the end of September. It's been said that Charles Fillmore is the greatest religious innovator since St. Paul the Apostle. He synthesized religion, philosophy, and science and produced a very practical system for us that resurrected the mystery schools, Gnosticism, and Eastern ideas, among others. He imparted a secret and hidden wisdom, which were really the resurrected ideas that had been inherent in Christianity through the Middle Ages. But this ancient wisdom was lost after that due to various reasons, mostly due to politics and religious dogma. Fillmore included in his system mysticism, yogic practices, esoteric spirituality, idealistic metaphysics, and post-Einsteinian physics. Maybe Fillmore learned to think outside of his American Christian box because he grew up around Native Americans, and he was even kidnapped by these Indians once for a day, which he thought later might have had something to do with the way that he gravitated towards some of these ideas, that maybe something was done in some ritual or something, we don't know. And perhaps he became more introspective because as a child, he was very poor, he was abandoned by his father, and he was lame due to an ice skating accident. Certainly those things and his fascination with transcendentalism strengthened his independent thinking, his character, his persistence, and his fascination with finding truth, capital T. He learned the value of endurance, visualization of what he wanted, and goal setting. And he carried through with his goals too. And later, when he realized to what extent there was a spiritual dimension to life, he set out to catapult his own into that dimension while remaining ever grounded on the relative plane. He always remained practical. In fact, Unity is called practical Christianity. When Fillmore went bankrupt several times because of the Midwestern towns he was living in went bust, he just kept on moving and succeeding with his new bride Myrtle and their 2 young sons. But Ruth Miller says in her book, The Power of Unity, The Amazing Discoveries of Charles Fillmore, the strain of moving with the added stress of financial difficulties was really hard on his beloved wife Myrtle's health. By 1888, the doctors had diagnosed her illness as tuberculosis, TB, and were giving up on her completely, suggesting that she would no longer be among the living in just a matter of months. Of course, this was totally unacceptable to both of them, but they didn't see what else they could do about it. Myrtle took all the medications the doctors had given her. She rested often, and she prayed hard. It helped a lot, too, when Charles's mother came and helped her with the household chores and the 2 young sons. But they went about in those intervening months when they thought she was not going to be there after 2 or 3 of, really. They went about their daily routines, they cared for their sons, they created a home, and they started building Charles's new business once again in a new town. And when Myrtle was up to it, they still attended poetry readings, lectures, all kinds of different spiritual meetings. They were particularly interested when someone came to town to talk about new ideas in science. It was at one of those lectures that their lives were changed completely. The man's name was E.B. Weeks, and he had just graduated from a school in Chicago run by a woman named Emma Curtis Hopkins. His lectures were based on her lessons, Hopkins' lessons, and held very unusual ideas about who we are exactly and what God is and how we experience health and illness. Mr. Weeks said one sentence in particular that got Myrtle's attention. He said, "I am a child of God. Therefore, I do not inherit illness." After her life, all her life, Myrtle had been told that she had inherited TB and that it would eventually kill her. She'd also been taught that God was some distant, judging figure out there more concerned about her sins than her well-being. Now, for the first time, Myrtle saw a different possibility in thinking about spirituality. So for the next weeks and months, she spent much of her time, as much as she could, studying the Bible. She focused particularly on the many passages in which God and Jesus promise a full and healthy, satisfying life to all of us. After reading for a while, she would close her eyes and feel the presence of the Holy Spirit in her life and know the love of the divine. She felt it. She knew it. After 2 weeks, friends noticed a difference. After 2 months, they started studying and praying with her. And after 2 years, Myrtle was completely free of all symptoms of tuberculosis, and she never experienced them again. Miraculous, total cure. Charles, of course, was delighted and impressed. He'd never had much interest in formal religion and dogma, though he did support Myrtle's involvement in the Episcopal Church. He just didn't see that what all the preachers had to say was really all that meaningful. After all, he felt that nature was sacred enough. But seeing his own wife use her religious faith to heal her body completely, now that was worth paying attention to. Charles went about his new interest as he had each one before. He immediately started to study every religious book he could find, including the Bible and new translations of sacred texts from India and Persia that were coming out about that time. Charles read them all: the Hindu, Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, the Quran, the Old and New Testaments, the transcendentalist writers like Ralph Waldo Emerson, and some European writers like Goethe and Swedenborg, and Christian Science literature by Mary Baker Eddy, all to get truth, capital T, wherever it was, whatever it was. He saw little bits of it in different places, and he wanted to find it. So Charles decided to, at that point, go to headquarters, so to speak. He figured that if God was real, God could be communicated with directly, or the whole thing was a fraud. He set aside about an hour a night each evening after work was done and his sons were in bed, and he sat in the silence and waited for God to speak to him. For almost a year, Fillmore sat and waited. And as he was going through the last few weeks, he was thinking about just giving up on the whole thing. It was a difficult year. Kansas City had stopped growing, real estate was no longer worth anything, and once more, Charles was facing bankruptcy. He was considering returning to Colorado to try another boom town. Then he had a dream. In it, he realized it was not the first time that he had had this dream. Someone was guiding him up and down the streets of Kansas City, showing him familiar places and saying that he had work to do there. Don't leave. It said the invisible power that has located you here will continue to be with you and aid you. Reflecting on this and looking over the past few months, he realized that he felt better in general and that his hip was healing. More, he realized that he was having frequent dreams that helped him at work and at home. He decided that his time in the silence was getting results. So he continued the practice, feeling grateful for what was happening to him. Soon he started to be aware of what he called a still pool of wisdom ready to overflow into his awareness. Later, he called it a deep reservoir out of which each of us is a stream flowing just as full as we allow it to in our lives. We all have access to all this if we will just allow it and choose it. As he listened to this inner wisdom, he received guidance on business and personal matters, and he began to feel a youthful joy and enthusiasm that he had lost when he was focusing all the time on his problems in business and family. More than that, he noticed that the signs of aging were reversing. His weak eye got better. His hearing was returning in his right ear. Then he saw that his leg was no longer as stiff as it had been. And then over the next months and years, he noticed that his leg was getting longer. Remember that one leg was 4 inches shorter than the other due to his childhood ice skating accident. His friends noticed it was getting longer. And the strange, tight, scar tissue skin was actually transforming into flesh, living flesh. Soon Charles was joining Myrtle and her friends each evening for prayer. They talked about people that they knew or who had written to them about their problems, and then they sat silently, each connecting with the divine power in their own way. In a few days, they were hearing from all these people that they'd been praying for, who were saying that their problems were gone or greatly diminished. Charles got the idea of sharing their new understanding in a magazine. He knew a local printer, and he still remembered enough about the printing business to do that. So the little group started printing and sending out a few pages each month, which they called Modern Thought. It was more like what we today would call a newsletter. But it was a way to share their understanding and to invite others to participate with them. In the meantime, Charles continued to work in real estate and to support his growing boys and this new venture of his. Charles and Myrtle realized that if their prayer worked for people who'd written them, then anyone, anywhere could help anyone else, anywhere else, through the same kind of prayer. So they put a little notice in a magazine inviting others of like mind to join them at 10 o'clock each evening, holding thoughts of well-being for those who had written to them while connecting with the power of God. Wherever they were at that time, just stop what they were doing. The response was immediate and gratifying. Lots of people said they'd like to be part of this new process. They did ask, however, that it be changed to 9 p.m. because 10 p.m. was pretty late for farmers and their families who had to be up before dawn. Remember, this is out in the West. So each night, Charles and Myrtle and whoever happened to be in the neighborhood would say a few words about the people and problems that needed prayer. They'd sit together in the silence, knowing that all across the country, hundreds and hundreds of other people were now starting to join them. They'd sit and focus their efforts on God as light, life, wisdom, health, peace, balance, and abundant supply. They would feel that divine power at work in their lives and in the world. And at that point, they would feel a deep sense of gratitude for their answered prayers. And in that gratitude, they would declare, Amen, which means so it is, or so be it, or literally, On this ground I stand, and from henceforth will I have my being. Over the years to come, this process would become the essence of their work, and millions of letters would come to them requesting prayer support until they built a team of volunteers who worked 24/7, 365 to address the requests. But that's getting ahead of our story that will continue next week. Okay. There are a couple of main ideas that are developing in this part of Charles Fillmore's life and wisdom. One is his realization that we are all meant to manifest abundance, health, and joy in our lives, all of us, all the time. The other is that we can do this by learning to access the spiritual plane and the truth about the way things really work. Eternal laws, eternal wisdom. Fillmore would later present these ideas as practical Christianity and what came to be known as unity. One of the ways that he packaged these practical and ancient tools was in the form of what he called the 12 powers, or the 12 tools for an abundant life. Fillmore said that these tools are ancient spiritual abilities that were perfectly expressed by Jesus Christ and are present in every one of us. We just need to learn to access them. We need to discover how to put these 12 powers to work in order to create the life of our dreams. Remember that Jesus Christ said, "These things that I do, ye shall do also, and greater." One of these powers is faith. Faith to believe, intuit, and perceive. I remind you here again of the book Mists of Avalon. The mysterious and heavenly island of Avalon was totally hidden by mists. No one could find it unless the mists parted. However, the mists only parted if you believed the island was there. Fillmore almost gave up at one point, but on some level, he maintained his faith, and it paid off, like having the patience of Job. And then once he saw his wife Myrtle's cure from what doctors called terminal tuberculosis, his faith at that point turned to total understanding. The second power, strength, the strength to endure the course. Fillmore never gave up about anything. He demonstrated Herculean strength in terms of starting all over in business after business and town after town as each one of these frontier western towns went bust. And he tackled his spiritual journey in the same strong way. 3, wisdom, the ability to evaluate, discern, apply what you know. Fillmore didn't feel that the fundamental religions provided logical answers. They're full of contradictions if taken literally. So he searched and studied everything he could find until he accessed truth, capital T, that he called wisdom. 4, love. 2,000 years ago, Jesus Christ said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." And he was misunderstood and crucified. 50 years ago, Paul McCartney sang, "All you need is love." And everyone got it. Things really are getting better. Fillmore knew the importance of loving ourselves and others in order to manifest the healing of mind and body. 5th power, understanding, the ability to know, to perceive, to comprehend, and apprehend. Fillmore's incessant reading, studying with various teachers, and exposing himself to many spiritual ideas resulted in an understanding of the true meaning of the Bible and religion, true spirituality. He rose above their literal and often contradictory interpretations to an understanding of their original, uncorrupted meaning. 6, will, the ability to choose, decide, command, lead, determine. This is clear in Fillmore's determination to forge ahead and finding spiritual truths that make sense and can be validated in daily life. 7, order, the ability to organize, to balance, sequence, and adjust. What is emerging in Fillmore's life is that he is putting God first in the order of things. And by so doing, everything else falls into place. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added to you. 8, zeal, the ability to be enthusiastic, passionate, start, motivate. In this phase of Fillmore's life, his zeal is starting a movement that will later attract millions around the world. 9th, elimination, the ability to release, remove, denounce, deny, let go. This is big. Fillmore is starting to let go of what doesn't serve him in his life. His old ideas, for example. We must all do that if we are to be born again. There's only so much time and energy. 10, life, the ability to energize, vitalize, enliven, animate, invigorate. This is certainly obvious in his life. 11 is power, the ability to master, have dominion and control. We all have these things. 12, imagination, the ability to image, picture, conceptualize, envision, and dream. This too is obvious as Fillmore is carving out of nothing a true spiritual dynasty. We see also today the beginning of Fillmore's understanding about healing. He realized that there is only one presence and one power in the universe, and that is God the Good. Thus, there is only love and perfection, and no such thing as disharmony or dis-ease, except in our minds. I'd like to share with you what the word healing means, according to Unity Minister Temple Hayes in her book entitled How to Speak Unity. She says, Jesus asked, "Do you want to get well?" He later states, "It is our faith which has made us well." These two profound truths, our wanting to be healed and our faith in healing, are significant in the Unity teachings. In the first truth, we acknowledge that we must want to be well. Hayes says, some people find comfort from the compassion and attention that being a victim receives. This may distract them from the healing process. So to them, the benefits of being sick and helpless outweigh the idea of getting well. This is all, of course, on a subconscious level, and nothing we should ever chastise ourselves about or be judgmental about, but just something worth looking at. In the second truth, we acknowledge that our faith plays an immense part in our ability to be whole. The faith that we have in the doctor, our practitioner, our diagnosis, and our God. It's vital as we enter into the whole journey of healing. Hayes says, healing does not always refer to the correction of a physical or emotional condition or reflect that we are somehow broken. Healing can be as profound and as simple as a new awareness, an awareness of how to love in a greater way. Healing is often a whole new insight. Fillmore says that what he calls race consciousness, or what we call our programming, often convinces us that such things as certain microbes will make us sick. Of course, when we look at Jesus healing the lepers and not contracting leprosy, and Charles Fillmore's caring for his wife with TB all that time and never being affected by it, we have to wonder about this inevitability. What might be important here is simply to plant the seed of possibility into ourselves. The possibility that maybe the inevitability of disease and disharmony and suffering is inaccurate. Maybe so-called miracles are possible and even normal. I certainly think so. In the poet Coleridge's words, we must have a willing suspension of disbelief. Certainly an open mind would be in order here. Something that many of us need to put on the back burner for a while, but it's nice to plant the seed. Some people might need to just think about that for a while, but I'm reminded here of the saying, the people who say it can't be done shouldn't bother those who are doing it, right? More on all this next week. Amen.